Vav in the Likutei Sichos, and it's the continuation. It's the next story in Parshas Beshalach. The Jewish people leave Egypt, right? The Pharaoh kicks them out. He throws them out of the country. And by the way, there's a Torah from the Magid, which was not developed in the previous Sicha, but it's brought in Svarim, that it says, Vahi Beshalach Parei Es Ha'am, when the Pharaoh sent the people out of Egypt, right? The word Es, Aleph Tov, the Gemara says, always denotes something else. In other words, it could have said Vahi B'Shalach Parei Ha'am, and it says Vahi B'Shalach Parei Es Ha'am. Bereishis bara Elokim Hashemayim Va'aretz would have been fine. It says Es Hashemayim Ve'es Ha'aretz, and the Gemara says that every S denotes something additional. So Vahi B'Shalach Parei Es Ha'am is translated Magid, and the Pharaoh sent the people along with something. What was the something that the Pharaoh sent them along with? The sparks of holiness from Mitzrayim. As they state in Midrash Magid, it's based on a medrash, and that in fact that when it says that the Midrash Magid says that when the Pharaoh ran after the Jewish people to meet them by the Yam Suf, it's because the Jewish people left some sparks behind, and Parei ran after them to give them to him. As they state in Pnimi Yisatera. Anyway, the Jewish people leave Egypt, and everybody is thinking about themselves, right? They're all collecting wealth. They were told to collect wealth. So everyone's collecting wealth. They're leaving the country. It's happening very, very fast. What does Moshe Rabbeinu concern himself? With the remains of Yosef HaTzadik. Remember, Yosef HaTzadik was left behind in Egypt, and according to Sfarim, it means all 12 Shvatim. And Yosef HaTzadik says, don't leave me in Mitzrayim. Pakoid yifked Elikim eschem. Elikim is going to remember you. Va'alisem es atzmeisem yizeh. Take my remains with you, itchem along with you. Moshe Rabbeinu finds the remains of Yosef HaTzadik, takes him out of Mitzrayim. And of course, as you know, again, it says in Midrash Chazal, that the Egyptians knew that the Yidden can't leave without Yosef's remains. So they put his remains in a steel casket, and they dropped it into the river the Nile. And Moshe Rabbeinu makes a plate out of gold, and he carves on it the words, Ali Shoir, rise up, ox, because Yosef is called an ox. He drops it into the river the Nile, and the casket surfaces, and Moshe Rabbeinu travels for 40 years with the remains of Yosef HaTzadik in the midbar. But of course, that golden plate, which said Ali Shoir, was used by Micha to make the egel, which is a cow, like an ox. By throwing that golden plate into the furnace, and it becomes the Egel Azov, the first idol the Jewish people ever create. So much for poetic justice, right? And fairness, and equity. You want to say something? No? Okay. And Moshe is busy with Yosef's remains. That's what Moshe does. You don't leave Mitzrayim, Moshe thinks about Yosef HaTzadik's remains. And it's a poignant little detail, right? Everybody's busy. Yosef is thinking about the remains of... Moshe Rabbeinu is thinking about the remains of Yosef HaTzadik, right? It's always that story, you know. As a kid, I read a story, and I don't want to waste time on the story, so I'll do it in 1 minute or less, that Lubavitch had a fire going back 300 years, before Chassidus was ever invented. And the city burned to the ground. So everyone built over their homes. There was an old man named Binyamin. Him and his wife never had any children. He's building this massive house. And everybody's talking about this Binyamin, this narcissistic, materialistic man. Him and his wife are both old. They're never going to have any children. And they're building a palace. And when the summer is over and everyone's homes are ready, Binyamin puts a sign in his house that says Beis HaKnesses. He's been building a shul. Everyone's building homes. They were all talking about how arrogant this Binyamin is. The Frierdiker Rebbe, as a child, davened in Binyamin's shtibel. It was still standing. And he describes the story. The shul was then probably 300 years old. The Frierdiker Rebbe has gone from Lubavitch 100 years. Right? He left Lubavitch in 1915. Now it's 2019. And the Frierdiker Rebbe knew Binyamin's shtibel intimately. He remembers Binyamin's shtibel. He knew the story behind Binyamin's shtibel. So here is Moshe Rabbeinu. Everyone is thinking about themselves. Moshe is carrying the remains of Yosef HaTzadik. So we read. Now, the reason I'm not giving you a long introduction, because this falls directly in line with the earlier Sicha. The Torah tells us that Moshe carries Yosef's remains. The Torah tells us that Moshe carries Yosef's remains. It's got to have more meaning than just the physical fact. It's Torah. So it's a story. It actually occurred. But nothing in Torah is a story. Everything in Torah is a lesson. Everything in Torah is eternal. Everything in Torah is always relevant. So what's the story? What's the neshama? What is the pnimius? What's behind this event that Moshe Rabbeinu is carrying the remains of Yosef HaTzadik? That's the question that we have. So we read, and you're going to find out that the answer is going to be compensation. You're making up for a loss in one area, the benefit in another area. In this case, actually, it's a little bit more positive, but that's the basic spirit. Let's read. B'tchilas Pashas, you know the rules, girls, right? Did you get a new copy? No, this is the old copy, right? This is the old copy. Girls, I gave out a bunch of these. There's a big stack of them. It's 3 sheets. I don't know how many sheets it is, whatever it is. B'tchilas Pashas, just read the underline and you'll be fine, okay? B'tchilas Pashaseinu, the beginning of Pashas B'Shalach reads, Vayikach Moshe es atzmes Yosef imi. Moshe Rabbeinu carries the remains, and of course the word atzmes, for those who don't speak Hebrew, means literally bones of Yosef HaTzadik with him. Ki hashbeya hashbeya v'geimu. Yosef made the Jewish people swear that when Hashem would remember them, they would remember him. You will carry my remains, my bones out, itchem, along with you. And of course, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't forget. And Moshe Rabbeinu, like every Rebbe, focuses on the most important thing, especially on those things that nobody else pays attention to. Turn to page 86. Afal pi, notwithstanding, was das Nemen atzmes Yosef is beikir. We all understand that carrying Yosef remains out of Mitzrayim is primarily an Inyan versus Shayech to Yetzias Mitzrayim, something has to do with the exodus from Egypt. Kash Boas Yosef, as the oath that Yosef made the children of Israel swear, Paked Yifked V'Geim, Hashem is going to remember you. V'Halisem Es Atzmesai, and you're going to carry out my remains. In other words, the primary significance of taking Yosef's remains out of Mitzrayim has to do with the past. We're in Egypt. The only condition or the only way we could leave Egypt is if we take Yosef along. It's past tense. That's the simple reason. Yidna not allowed to leave Mitzrayim, as Eshet and Medrash. Yidna not allowed to leave Mitzrayim without the remains of Yosef HaTzadik. So taking Yosef HaTzadik's remains along is sort of like a passport or a license. We can leave, we have our passport with us. That's the way you understand it. So it's looking back. We were stuck in Egypt for many reasons. The last reason we were stuck in Egypt is because we couldn't leave Yosef behind. We somehow got a hold of his casket, we got a hold of his Guf Kaddish, we're carrying with it, now we're ready to go. So the Rebbe says, is das ober euch, even though it's primarily about the past, it is, however, also verbunden, attached mit vayisa v'lekim es am derech hamidbar, with the future, that the Eibishter is going to lead the Jewish people through the desert for 40 years. The halicha in midbar dafka, the journey through the desert. Now, girls, you already know that the journey through the desert is what? It's the result of a failure. We just finished the Sikha. The Sikha we just completed made the point that the business of being in the desert as part of the journey is a symptom of a failure. Had we succeeded, we'd also gone through the desert. But if it had taken us 11 days, we would not identify ourselves by the journey through the desert. It would be a hiccup, like as if it didn't happen. So the journey through the desert, which we're describing in this Sikha, we know from the earlier Sikha, is a consequence of a mistake we made, or in fact, a series of mistakes that we made. Okay? And therefore, we have to reread the words that Moshe takes the remains of Yosef HaTzadik out of Mitzrayim. Why? Reason number 1, can't leave without him. Reason number 2, because if we're going to go through the desert, we need Yosef with us. Okay? So we're going to reread it. Page 86, second column. Vayikach Moshe atzmes Yosef imi. Moshe Rabbeinu carries the atzmes Yosef. Now girls, who speaks Hebrew? I just told you. What does atzmes mean? Bones. Right? When you take a person who's passed away to their final resting place, or when you exhume a person who's already passed years before and you remove their remains to a new location, you say, oh look, there go the bones of so-and-so. I don't think so. There goes so-and-so. Everybody knows that a human body that's left in the ground long enough is going to be at best bones, and at worst nothing. But it's not a desirable illusion. It's not a nice way to describe a person who's passed away 100-something years earlier. Why does the Torah determine or interpret the word, allude to the remains of Yosef HaTzadik as bones? So the Rebbe says, in analyzing that word, you gain insight to the second idea, that taking Yosef HaTzadik out of Mitzrayim is not only about the past, it's about the future as well. How? Let's read. As says, nit kein loshen kavod for tzadikim. It's not an honorable allusion for a tzaddik to say that they're carrying his bones. The Torah should have arguably not used the terminology, the bones of Yosef. Huh? This is the Oren. Now in English, the English translation for Oren is casket. But the word Oren is far more beautiful than the word casket. The word Oren means like the ark. Right? This is what we say. We have levias. We should never have any. When they carry the remains of the person who's passed away, they say the Oren gate. Now in English, Oren means a casket, but it really means an ark. In other words, we're identifying this person by what's sacred. Why are we identifying Yosef by bones? Let's identify him by an Oren. So the Rebbe says you have to retranslate the word atzmis. Atzmis means bones. But atzmis in Hebrew also means the essence of. Vayikach meishes atzmis Yosef doesn't mean the simple translation of atzomes, which means bones, but the very essence of what Yosef is. Let's read the next paragraph. In fact, the reason the word atzmes is used because the Torah wants to underscore what it is that we are talking to. As I is getting from Mitzrayim, when the Jewish people left Egypt, Moshe took along the bones of Yosef, took along the remains of Yosef, but he took along the remains of Yosef as they are identified as atzomes, as atzmos. Let's read. Was atzmes werden as angerufen. Atzomes werden as angerufen. Bones are called atzomes, weil sie seinen etzem v'tekev ha'odam v'ha'bal chai. And if you look in footnote 16, the Rebbe brings a source for this idea that the bones of a human being represent the essence of the human being. The bones of a human being represent the essence of the human being. So the reference to Atzmes Yosef, which means bones, is not sustained, is not kept to belittle Yosef HaTzadik and to diminish his honor, because if Atzomes simply meant bones, they would have used the word Oren. But rather to denote that this is the essence and the power of a person. Right? This is true in biology, correct? What makes vertebrae special? Huh? That we have bones and we can hold ourselves up against gravity. And because we have many, many bones, in addition to be able to hold it up, we can bend and twist and turn, right? We're flexible. We're not hard and fixed or mushy and flabby and live in the water. We can, right, bones, our identity is that we stand upright. We are erect, right? One of the so-called classes of human beings called Homo erectus. We're erectus. Human beings walk vertically. Animals go horizontally. We walk upright. If we didn't have bones, we couldn't do that. So bones make us into what we are in our substance. So atzomis means bones, but atzomis also means our personality, our essence. The atzmius von Yosef, the so-called essence of what Yosef is, or in other words, and in more simple words, etzem inyani shel Yosef. If you could study Yosef HaTzadik and identify which characteristic more than any other talks to his very essence. Who was this man? What was his purpose? Why did he live? And how did he live? And what would he accomplish? That's called Atzmas Yosef. So technically it means the bones. But the Torah would not identify Yosef by bones if that's what the Torah meant. The Torah would find a much more honorable allusion, like Arei Shel Yosef, which, by the way, you have in other cases. In Rashi, in Pashas Ba'aloischa, where the Jewish people are bringing a Korban Pesach and some people are Tameh because they're involved with Arei Shel Yosef. Over there, the word doesn't say Atzomes, it doesn't say bones, it says Arei Shel Yosef. Okay? So the reason Atzomes is used because we don't mean bones as bones. We mean the substance and essence of what Yosef was. Und das mitnehmen Atzmas Yosef. And when it says in the Chumash that Moshe Rabbeinu saw to it that the remains of Yosef HaTzadik We're taken out of Mitzrayim, and we identify that the word atzmeis is be'ike negeya. It matters mostly. We took Yosef remains out of Egypt. Why? 2 reasons. Number 1, we couldn't leave without him. And number 2, we couldn't move forward without him. In Pshat, the simple idea is we took along Yosef's remains because we couldn't go without him. We were not allowed to leave Egypt without taking his remains. The deeper idea is we needed Yosef going forward. What does forward mean? We're going into a desert. We're going into a combative environment. We're going into an inhospitable environment. We're going into a place that's not in the spirit of Yiddishkeit, and we need to be Yidden in that environment. To survive that test, you need Atzmas Yosef. Okay, now I don't have enough time to learn the rest of the Sikha. So instead of swallowing it and butchering it, I'm going to stop here and tell you a story. And IYH, Belina, the BLND, in 2 weeks from now, we will learn the rest of the Sikha. Next week is Yud Shvat. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but I'm starting to prepare Teskavo. I'm actually starting to prepare a different part of Kaddish, if you can imagine that. But I want to tell you a Maisa. It's an interesting story. It's a poignant story. It's an emotional story, and I guess on some levels, even an uncomfortable story. The GEM, right, the Jewish Education Media, gives out the weekly films of the Rebbe. What do they call it? But what is the name of the whatever? Every week you get about 15 minutes on the Rebbe. It includes a Sikha, about 10 or 11 minutes long. Then you have a special moment, and then you have I don't know what else they call it, and then you have a My Encounter. Everybody who buys these films, the first thing you watch is the My Encounter. Even though on the My Encounter you don't see the Rebbe's face, but you hear about the Rebbe's muhus. So one of the stories of the My Encounter is a Yid by the name of Harav Shar Yosef Cohen. He's the chief rabbi of Haifa. And he's a pretty big rabbi. He actually ran for chief rabbi of Israel, and he didn't win. But he's a very well-respected rabbi. His father was a famous Gaon and Chassid, I guess, in his way. And Yosef Cohen had a relationship with the Rebbe. The Rebbe knew his grandfather. The Rebbe actually had to hide. The KGB was looking for the Rebbe. The Rebbe went to hide in a small village outside Leningrad at his grandparents' home. And the Rebbe had a chavrusa with his Zaydis. So the Rebbe always felt close to him. Since Rabbi Yosef Cohen had a number of meetings with the Rebbe. He's an Orthodox rabbi, he's a Zionist. So of course, if you're an Orthodox rabbi and a Zionist, you're going to ask the Rebbe the $1 million question. What's the $1 million question?
Why aren't you in Israel?
Why aren't you living in Israel? Or at least come for a visit. So this question was asked of the Rebbe hundreds of times. I don't think that's an exaggeration. And the Rebbe had so many different answers. The Rebbe gave so many different answers to the question. Everybody got a different answer. It's all he himself asked the Rebbe this question a number of times, and each time the Rebbe gave him a different answer. And then one time the Rebbe told him, and what he said in the video is, I felt that when the Rebbe gave me this answer, this was the whole truth. This was the real reason. After he had asked the question over a number of different yechidus, a number of different visits, and the Rebbe each time had given him a different response, on one occasion he asked the Rebbe, why doesn't the Rebbe at least come for a visit? The Rebbe tells the Rebbe, you come to Israel, you'll change the landscape. Your presence will be huge. You'll wake up Yiddishkeit. So the Rebbe said to him, after all the other excuses that he'd given him over the years, I made a hachlata, I made a resolution to never be further than a 24-hour journey from the Friedrich Rebbe Zoyel. I made a commitment never to be further from the other than 24 hours. And he meant by car, or maybe even on foot, not by plane. And therefore I can't leave, because I can't leave the Rebbe behind. So Rabbi Cohen said to the Rebbe, in Yiddish, of course, there is a solution to this problem of not being within 24 hours of the Rebbe's oil. Men can mitnemen atzmes Yosef, which is exactly the wording of our Pasha. You can take along atzmes Yosef. Now, what Rabbi Cohen meant to say was not that they would physically remove, exhume the previous Rebbe's remains and transport him and bury him in Eretz Yisrael. He meant to say, you know and I know that visiting the Friedrich Rebbe's Oyhel is a spiritual thing. That spirituality you can take with you. You don't need a physical location. You don't need physical remains. Atzmos Yosef means the spirit of Yosef, the essence of Yosef. So he says to the Rebbe, so dem is da netze. The Rebbe is saying that he can't leave New York because he needs to be 24 hours early. There's a solution. Take along the Rebbe with you, spiritually, Atzmos Yosef. The Rebbe became very serious immediately, and his eyes filled with tears. In other words, the Rebbe reacted to this proposal very emotionally, meaning to say, he touched a raw nerve, he touched a very sensitive nerve, and the Rebbe's reaction showed, I don't know if the right word is displeasure, but it showed pain. Like, pain means it's not so easy, it's not so comfortable, and you're really stepping on my head. You can ask questions, but you gotta know. So he says, when I saw the Rebbe's reaction, I realized that I had crossed the line, and I apologized, and I withdrew the question, and I never asked it again. That's what we're learning here in the Sikha. The Rebbe would frequently talk about the Frierdiker Rebbe and use the terminology Atzmos Yosef. Atzmos Yosef means the Frierdiker Rebbe has passed away, physically he's not present, but what the Rebbe is we have, that's Atzmos Yosef, the essence of Yosef. Not the bones of Yosef, the essence of Yosef. Moshe takes along Atzmos Yosef. And the Koach to go forward in the Golus is because we have this connection to Atzmos Yosef, to the essence of what Yosef is. There was a time that a group of rabbis came to the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe to reduce his visits to the Oyel, with the argument that it's too physically exhausting for the Rebbe to go to the Oyel so often. So the Rebbe says to them, you all ask me questions. You all expect answers. I'm supposed to answer all of you. He says, I need my Rebbe too. I need my Rebbe. You need me, I'm your Rebbe. I need my Rebbe. In other words, if you want me to help you, I need to have my connection. And I can't cut back on my visits to the Tzin. This is where I draw my chayes from. I live from Atzmos Yosef. And that's what we're learning. Atzmos Yosef, the essence of Yosef. Moshe takes from Mitzrayim. And we'll do this next time in Mitzvah Hashem. Thank you all for coming.